This labyrinthine life is lived predominantly on the unceded lands of the Tongarong and Dja Dja Wurrung people of central Victoria. The presenter, producer and participants acknowledge the continuing cultural connection to the land, water and sky country of the traditional custodians and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We also acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians and elders of the land, water and sky country on which the lives of our audience are experienced. Welcome to Labyrinthine Life, a podcast where the diverse passions and possibilities of life meet and mingle. I'm your host, Kaylee Meo, and this podcast was created as an extension of my own labyrinthine living experience. Like you, I am exploring what it means to be human, blessed to lead and learn a labyrinthine life along the way. In this episode, we'll be learning the labyrinth, the form and the myth. We're going to start by comparing the maze and the labyrinth to explore the important differences between them. We'll get to know more about the use of the labyrinth as a tool on our journey, both metaphorical and physical. We'll explore how to use it to discover more about ourselves, our passions, and our paths towards developing a labyrinthine life. The similarities between the maze and the labyrinth are many, and the terms are often used interchangeably. They both trace a path, they both define space, distance, and time. They both intrigue and tantalise us to find out what's around the next bend. In her book, Red Thread, on mazes and labyrinths, Charlotte Higgins writes of the quote-unquote biformed labyrinth. She says, "Like the creature that inhabits it, the labyrinth has two natures. On the one hand, it conveys beauty, pattern and order. On the other, chaos, fear and bewilderment. To contemplate the shape of a labyrinth is to stand back and allow the eye to enjoy the intricacy of line and design, to feel a sense of mastery and comprehension. But to be inside the labyrinth is something else. The body, not just the mind, is implicated, and the experience is not cerebral and intellectual, but physical. In that confined and controlled space, walking between high walls or upon a narrowly delineated path, comes an intense awareness of one's own heft and height, of one's way of moving. To feel trapped within the labyrinth's intestinal coils ushers in thoughts of entrails, of the strange, unremembered red tunnels out of which we all, once, emerged. With thoughts of sex and birth come intimations of death. There is something crypt-like about this dark, catacombs twists. The labyrinth is, then, both a symbol of the body and its fragile mysteries, and a gesture of optimism that a corner of the universe can be mastered and given pattern and order by the human mind. And so, with its dual pleasures of detachment and immersion, it is the perfectly satisfying aesthetic object, the original feat of architecture, the great mythic symbol of human ingenuity. A lot of these ideas also apply to the maze as we know it in popular culture. But the differences between the maze and the labyrinth speak a lot to the differences between the dichotomies of differing cultural approaches to modern life. On the one hand, a maze can represent the logical, linear, masculine, yang, enlightened. This is the waxing cycle of the moon, from new to first quarter to fullness. It is our society's obsession with the nubile sexuality of the youth and maiden, never aging, always available, innocence for the exploitation. We enter the maze at one gate, follow the twists and turns, backtrack from dead ends and change course as needs dictate. The energy is explosive, travelling in all directions at once, an outward-looking and growth-focused progression through life. A constant trajectory is non-existent, our path haphazard, until we eventually exit the maze elsewhere from whence we began. The only way out is through, to run away from or avoid facing that which came before. The labyrinth, on the other hand, is a symbol of the creative, circular, feminine, yin, shadowed and closely held, inward-gazing and cyclical way of living which has long been subsumed to the patriarchal and colonial models of society. We follow the waning moon through its dissemination as it shares the knowledge gleaned from this passage of time, through the metaphorical and physical shedding of that which no longer serves, so that as we come back around the spiral path, we are ready to take the lessons of this recently past time period into the next. It is a way of living associated with the dreaming and storytelling of Indigenous cultures and traditional custodians all over the earth. These are cultures with a focus on being rather than doing, more ancient than our Western culture whose story and myth of the labyrinth we will shortly explore. This is not to say that action is not required to journey through the labyrinth, but from a single entrance point, that journey spirals inwards towards the core. Our focus, visual and energetic, narrows to that which is directly in front of us, the thing we can no longer avoid by twisting and turning and changing our path. We meet our own shadow, that personal and private part of ourselves, that which we mask with social acceptability. Once at the omphalos, which means the point, the navel, the centre, we can spend as much or as little time there as we like, but the only way out is to take what we have discovered in that interior space, apply it to our forward journey, and emerge from the labyrinth at the same place we entered, and yet not the same person who entered. Are you familiar with the term nasal gazing? It's a synonym for self-reflection. Do you make time in your labyrinthine life for self-reflection? Here are a few more questions you might like to ponder on your journey into the labyrinth. How often do you find yourself in a situation that you have encountered before? Do you follow the old patterns of interaction between the main characters in your life? Is it time to change those habits of relating in order to meet the needs of yourself and those around you more effectively? Where will you find the courage to do so? If you ask, the universe will provide, but do be careful what you wish for. Be sure to go gently with yourself as you build up the 5 strengths you'll need along the way. Renee Giarusso introduced me to the concept of the 5 strengths through her Limitless Leaders newsletter, and it's a framework that I have applied to my own travels through this labyrinthine life. But from our Western patriarchal storytelling tradition, we know, as fact, both intellectually and physically, that the labyrinth is a myth. There is nothing there for us beyond a somewhat grisly story of human passions with resulting consequences, a slightly sinister sense of confinement and boundaries imposed, right? We are logical people. A story is just a story. It ends when we close the pages of the book. But storytelling is one of the oldest of human traditions. It's how we have communicated meaning and taught social mores in multiple layers of metaphor, simile, and most frequently forgotten, allegory across countless generations. The symbolism of stories is the part that gets lost as we move from oral to written traditions across the ages. It is the nuance of voice that conveys as much meaning as the specific words chosen. After reacquainting listeners with the feminist version of the labyrinthine myth in this episode, other episodes of this season of Labyrinthine Life will address my interpretation of the allegorical meanings behind the characters and their actions as presented through the story. I'm by no means a scholar of this work. My understanding comes through lived experiences of shamanic journeying by drum and deep meditative conversations held with the more than human while in that altered state in liminal space-time. This means that rather than a biformed labyrinth discussed earlier, I prefer to explore working with the triformed labyrinth. We cannot travel the looped and spiralling path without changes in the spirit realm as much as the body and mind. The story itself, with the hidden layers of meaning, guides the development of this realm, just as our feet are guided along the physical path by the confinement of the walls on either side. As I mentioned moments ago, the direction of our travel through myth and story is heavily influenced by the words and intentions of the storyteller themselves. For instance, according to ChatGPT's retelling from the collective modern psyche of the internet, we discover a version of the story where Pasiphae's lust is forced upon her in retribution for her husband's slight against the god Poseidon. It begins thus. Minos was the legendary king of Crete, son of Zeus and Europa. He had earned the favour of Poseidon, the god of the sea, who sent him a beautiful white bull as a sign of divine approval. However, Minos did not fulfil his promise to sacrifice the bull to Poseidon, instead keeping it for himself due to its exceptional beauty. As a punishment for his disrespect, Poseidon caused Pasiphae, Minos' wife, to fall deeply in love with the bull. Pasiphae was consumed by an uncontrollable desire and sought a way to satisfy her unnatural attraction. With the help of the master craftsman Daedalus, Pasiphae devised a wooden cow-shaped contraption in which she could hide and mate with the bull. From this union, Pasiphae conceived a monstrous offspring, the Minotaur, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull. However, in the words of Charlotte Higgins again, we discover a feminist interpretation of the story of the labyrinth's creation and purpose, wherein Pasiphae is very much an agent of her own path. A long time ago, on an island far away, was born a boy who was named Minos. He grew up to become the ruler of the island, which was called Crete, Like his father, Zeus, the king of the gods, Minos was famous for his law-giving and stern justice. His land was prosperous. 90 cities grew up there, which he ruled from a magnificent palace he built at Knossos. His power stretched from the island to the edges of the mainland and the busy seaways between. One day, Minos' wife, Pasiphae, was inspecting the great royal cattle herds. Usually, it was a task that she endured rather than enjoyed, but on this occasion her eye was caught by a new beast, a great bull, splendid and handsome, with a glow about him, almost of intelligence, that set him apart from the other creatures. She took an interest in him. She began to go to him regularly, to feed him, groom him. At first, her fascination seemed like a harmless diversion, but as the weeks passed, she found herself thinking about him all the time. His power, his animal beauty, his apparently inexhaustible understanding of her loneliness. It came to be that her nights were full of the bull. She'd dream about him, imagine doing extraordinary things with him. She was horrified with herself, and she tried to put it out of her mind, tried to distract herself with spinning and singing. But the bull was all she could see. The creature had completely invaded her. It was as if she'd been possessed by some god, as if she were under a curse. She went to Daedalus, the artist whom Minos employed at his court. In secret, and with the promise of much gold, she told him what was required. Daedalus responded with sketches, a prototype. There was no moral scruple that he could not overcome with his joy in invention. In a hidden part of his workshop, he fashioned a hollow simulacrum of a cow. It was so realistic that you would think it lived and breathed. It had a heifer's velvety fur, liquid eyes that really blinked, and trembling, sensitive nostrils. When Minos was off fighting one of his interminable wars, Pasiphae summoned up her courage. She struggled into the cow machine and, carefully operating the mechanical legs as she'd been taught by Daedalus, went to the bull. Later, she had a baby, if you could call it that. Its lower half was boy-shaped, but the neck and shoulders were those of a little black calf. His name was Asterion, but mostly he was known as the Minotaur, meaning Minos' bull. You may have detected my own preference for the feminist retelling of stories in the published episodes of the Labyrinthine Life podcast so far. Like all podcasts, there is an element of the vanity project to this publication. It is a platform for my voice and for the collection of voices curated by me to share our experiences of living a labyrinthine life with others. These experiences of living slowly, connectedly, and lightly is not one the majority of society pursues. Neither is the feminist perspective one which modern society values. So because this is my platform, and I have my own areas of interest, my intention is to bring the less common elements and experiences of the labyrinthine life to the fore, which includes a lot of feminist retelling of stories. As we move through the episodes of this season of Labyrinthine Life and explore each of the characters of the labyrinth myth, you will come to understand why I have chosen to align with Charlotte Higgins' feminist interpretation as the path towards change in ourselves and the world around us. To conclude the story of how the labyrinth came into being, allow me to share the final words of Higgins' retelling. Asterion bellowed. All babies bellow. But he never formed words. He grew fast to maturity. After a year, he was a shaggy giant. He loved the wide meadows and the pastures, the cry of the hoopoe and the shadow of the hawk on the grass as it flew for its prey. He delighted to walk among the fields of orchid, of iris, of asphodel. They should have left him to roam the secret wilds, the mountains and the high valleys. He would have come to little harm. He might even have been happy, if he had found the centaurs in their remote woodland clearings, or the nymphs of the trees and the springs, or the fauns and the satyrs, the other biformed creatures of nature. But he was a shame and a disgrace to the king, a bestial reminder of Pasiphae's unnatural desires, which meant another job for Daedalus. The king ordered him to construct an intricate building full of crinkles and puzzles, the design of which would utterly confound all who entered. Imagine a hopelessly tangled ball of yarn that you are trying to unsnarl, patiently guiding the thread back and through itself. Daedalus' building was as knotted and tortuous as that messy, mazy skein. The building was called the Labyrinth, and Asterion was put to live in it. Deprived of the sky, a prisoner of Daedalus' web of paths and tunnels, his mind misted over and he grew savage. His human nature began to cloud and overwhelm his bull nature. His solace in the dark was to feast on flesh. Having covered the structure and story, we now come to the use of a labyrinth as a tool in our own lives. how does the idea of travelling a path help us? How do we take the metaphorical and apply it to the physical? I mentioned earlier that we have 5 strengths we need to develop in order to embody the labyrinthine life. These are, in order of my personal emphasis on the priorities most needed in the world today, communal, emotional, spiritual, mental, and physical strengths. I'll delve into them all in good time, but for now, it helps to know that the labyrinth is a tool that allows us to walk the path of development in all these areas. I suggest you start by creating a simple labyrinth from any materials you have available. There are a few different labyrinth images that you can use for a template in the show notes for this episode, which are available from the labyrinthine.life website. That's labyrinthine.life. Your labyrinth can be small, and you can trace the path with your finger or a pen, or it can be large, a part of the landscape that you can physically walk. As you create your labyrinth, focus on your intention for the project, keeping in mind the 5 strengths. This is the first stage of using the labyrinth to develop your mental strength, by the way. Focused meditation will help you to think clearly in all areas of your life. You might intend to use your labyrinth to bring your community together for one or more events. For example, you can create the labyrinthine community. You can walk the labyrinthine community. You can discuss the symbolism and meaning that the labyrinth has for each of the community members. You can also work individually with the labyrinth, perhaps using it to guide you through emotional situations. A period of grief, anger, gratitude can all be explored through tracing the path and asking questions of ourselves along the way. The flow of answering words into a journal might be a physical manifestation of the path you'd like to explore. After all, journal and journey have the same etymological root in the Latin word diurnalis, which means day. I do love an interesting digression. So because we're discussing a Greek myth about the labyrinth, and the equivalent Greek etymological root is pronounced ephemerida, from which we get the English word ephemera, or items that weren't intended to last beyond their immediate and often single use. Consider again the dichotomy between a labyrinthine life of purpose and the mazed existence of the detritus of everyday life in the modern era. For me, the journey to building spiritual strength means incorporating the shape, symbolism, and story of the labyrinth into our rituals and celebrations, reclaiming and recreating meaning for and from the ephemera so that it too is transformed. There are examples of the labyrinth being used in religious traditions as well. It's often replaced the long and arduous physical journey of a pilgrimage, so the labyrinth was used as a metaphor for the pilgrim's path. Thus our physical strength is developed through the building, maintaining, and walking of a large-scale labyrinth over time. In conclusion of our discussion of using and developing the tools of a labyrinthine life, I agree again with the words of Charlotte Higgins in her work Red Thread on Mazes and Labyrinths, that the labyrinth appeals to our deepest and most basic desires, the longing to be held within a containing structure, just as the overwhelming red insides of our bodies are contained by their bones and sinews and skin. The labyrinth is about power and powerlessness, mastery and terror. It is also a coiled line, a thread, a narrative, a fabrication, a fiction. In this labyrinthine life, no one else can be your heroine or your hero. So I encourage you to go, develop the strengths you need so as to write the story and make it meaningful, make it epic, and above all, make it your own. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Labyrinthine Life. Like most of my life, this podcast is a passion project, which means episodes may drop in bingeable season bundles on a particular theme or topic, or they could appear as singles when I have met interesting folks with whom I have connected. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe at your favourite podcast platform or via the website labyrinthine.life, as I'd hate for you to miss the next instalment. That's labyrinthine.life. You can also find all the show notes on the labyrinthine.life website too.